When Ethan Cole answered a phone call in perfect Dutch while mopping a luxury hotel floor, he shattered the invisible walls that had kept him trapped for years. The woman who heard him, Vivian Hart, billionaire owner of the empire he cleaned, would uncover a conspiracy that buried talent, destroyed lives, and nearly cost her company everything. One forbidden conversation, 6 hidden languages, a system about to explode. If you want to see how a single moment can change everything, stay until the end. And please, hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The marble floor of the Grand Meridian Hotel stretched before Ethan Cole like an ocean of indifference, endless, cold, and unforgiving. He pushed his mop across its polished surface in steady, rhythmic strokes, the same motion he'd repeated 5 nights a week for the past 3 years. The lobby towered above him, all crystal chandeliers and gold-trimmed columns, a monument to wealth that might as well have existed on another planet. It was 11:47 p.m. In 13 minutes, his shift would end. In 25 minutes, if the bus ran on time, he'd be home. In 30 minutes, he'd check on Maya, his 7-year-old daughter, make sure her blankets were tucked tight, and maybe, just maybe, allow himself to sleep. Ethan had learned to measure his life in minutes. Minutes until the next shift. Minutes until Maya's next meal. Minutes until the rent was due again. At 34 years old, he'd become an expert at making time stretch, at squeezing life into the narrow spaces between exhaustion and survival. He wrung out the mop, the chemical smell of industrial cleaner sharp in his nostrils. Across the lobby, the night concierge scrolled through his phone, barely acknowledging Ethan's existence. To everyone who passed through these doors, the businessmen in $1,000 suits, the tourists clutching designer shopping bags, even the other staff members, Ethan was furniture, functional, forgettable, invisible. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Ethan froze. The staff rules were clear: no personal calls during work hours, no phones on the floor, no exceptions. But when he saw the number, international, beginning with +31, his heart lurched. It was the hospital in Amsterdam. His hand moved before his mind could stop it. He pulled the phone from his pocket, glanced around to make sure his supervisor wasn't lurking nearby, and answered. "Met Ethan Cole," he said quietly, turning toward the wall. The voice on the other end was strained, speaking rapid Dutch. His uncle, his last living relative in the Netherlands, had taken a fall. The doctors needed consent for emergency surgery. They needed family medical history. They needed decisions, now. Ethan's response flowed like water, smooth and natural, his Dutch accent flawless. "Ja, ik begrijp het. Mijn oom heeft een allergie voor penicillin. Dat moet absoluut in zijn dossier staan." He didn't notice the woman standing 15 feet behind him. Vivian Hart had built an empire on observation. At 42, she owned 17 luxury hotels across 3 continents, and she hadn't achieved that by missing details. She'd come down to the lobby to check on a complaint about the overnight staff, something about incomplete cleaning schedules. But now she stood perfectly still, her Louboutin heels silent on the marble floor. The janitor was speaking Dutch. Not tourist Dutch, not textbook Dutch. Native Dutch, with the subtle Amsterdam inflection she recognized from years of business meetings in the Netherlands. The man with the mop and the rumpled uniform was navigating a complex medical conversation with the ease of someone who'd spoken the language since childhood. Vivian's mind raced. She knew every executive in her company, every manager, every specialist she'd recruited from Europe. But a janitor? Speaking flawless Dutch while mopping floors at midnight? Ethan ended the call, his hands trembling slightly. The surgery would proceed, his uncle would be okay, but the fear that had gripped him for those few minutes left him hollow. "Excuse me." The voice behind him was crisp, authoritative, and definitely not pleased. Ethan spun around, shoving his phone into his pocket. The woman standing before him radiated power, from her perfectly tailored black suit to the way she held herself, shoulders back, chin level, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. He recognized her immediately. Vivian Hart, owner of the entire hotel chain, the woman whose signature appeared on company-wide memos. The person who existed so far above his pay grade that he'd never imagined being in the same room with her, let alone being addressed directly. I, I'm sorry, Ethan stammered, his mind scrambling. It was an emergency. My uncle. You speak Dutch. It wasn't a question. Ethan blinked. Of all the things he'd expected her to say, a reprimand about phone policy, a threat about his job, this hadn't been on the list. Yes, I do. Where did you learn it? His throat felt tight. I lived in Amsterdam for 2 years, during my master's program. Vivian's eyebrow arched. Your master's program. The skepticism in her voice stung more than it should have. Ethan was used to being underestimated, used to people seeing the uniform instead of the person wearing it. But something about the way she looked at him, like he was a puzzle that didn't fit, made him want to prove her wrong. Linguistics, he said quietly. University of Amsterdam. I graduated 6 years ago. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The lobby felt cavernous around them, filled with the distant hum of the elevator and the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers. Vivian pulled out her phone. What's your full name? Ethan Cole. She typed rapidly, her expression unreadable. 30 seconds passed, then a minute. When she looked up again, something had shifted in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. You applied for a translator position here 3 years ago. It wasn't a question, but Ethan nodded anyway. The memory burned like acid. He'd applied when Maya was 4, when he'd still believed his education might matter, that someone might see past his circumstances. I did, he confirmed. I never heard back. And before that, you applied for roles in conference coordination, guest relations, international partnerships. Vivian scrolled through her phone, reading from what he assumed was his digital file. 12 applications over 18 months, all rejected. Ethan said nothing. What was there to say? The system had spoken clearly enough. Vivian's jaw tightened. And yet somehow you ended up here, with a mop. I needed a job, Ethan said simply. I have a daughter. Rent doesn't wait for perfect opportunities. Before Vivian could respond, a door slammed open across the lobby. Gerald Moss, the night operations manager, strode toward them with the self-important urgency of a small man wielding borrowed authority. Ms. Hart! Gerald's voice boomed across the empty space. I apologize for this disturbance. I'll handle this employee immediately. This employee, Vivian cut him off, her voice like ice, speaks fluent Dutch. Did you know that? Gerald faltered mid-stride. What? I asked if you were aware that one of your janitors holds a master's degree in linguistics and speaks... She glanced at Ethan. How many languages? 6, Ethan said quietly. Fluently. Gerald's face cycled through several shades of red. Ms. Hart, I assure you, phone use during work hours is strictly... I'm not interested in your phone policy. Vivian's tone could have frozen water. I'm interested in why a polyglot with a graduate degree has been cleaning floors for 3 years while we've spent hundreds of thousands outsourcing translation services. Ethan watched Gerald's expression shift from confusion to something darker, a flash of recognition, then quickly suppressed panic. With all due respect, Gerald said carefully, we have hiring protocols, standards. Background checks revealed that Mr. Cole had gaps in his employment history, concerns about reliability. Gaps, Vivian repeated flatly. Single parent, Gerald continued, warming to his narrative. Young child. History of calling out for childcare emergencies. We couldn't risk placing someone unreliable in a client-facing position. The words hung in the air like poison. Ethan's hands clenched around the mop handle. He'd heard versions of this speech before, from HR representatives, from hiring managers, from well-meaning people who explained why his qualifications didn't quite compensate for his complicated life. But hearing it said so baldly, in front of the company owner, made something inside him crack. I've called out twice in 3 years, Ethan said, his voice level despite the anger coursing through him. Once when my daughter had pneumonia, once when my childcare provider quit without notice. I've worked every holiday, every weekend, every shift you've asked me to cover. I've never been late, never left early, never complained. Gerald's jaw tightened. The decision was made by HR. Show me the paperwork, Vivian interrupted. I want to see every application Mr. Cole submitted, every rejection, and every decision point in his file. In my office, tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Ms. Hart, I really don't think... That wasn't a request, Gerald. The night manager's face went pale. He nodded stiffly and retreated, throwing one last venomous glance at Ethan before disappearing through the staff entrance. Vivian turned back to Ethan, her expression softer but still unreadable. What other languages? Spanish, French, German, Mandarin, and English, Ethan listed, plus enough Italian and Portuguese to navigate business conversations. And you're cleaning floors. It wasn't an accusation exactly, but it felt like one. Ethan lifted his chin. I'm feeding my daughter. There's no shame in honest work. No, Vivian agreed. There isn't, but there's plenty of shame in a system that buries talent because it's inconvenient. She slipped her phone into her pocket. Do you have childcare tomorrow afternoon? The question caught him off guard. My neighbor watches Maya after school. Why? Because I want you at a meeting tomorrow, 2 p.m., 4th floor, conference room B. We're hosting preliminary negotiations for an international partnership, Dutch, German, and Mandarin speakers. Our usual translator called in sick. She paused. Can you be there? Ethan's heart hammered. This felt like a test, like one of those moments that could either change everything or blow up spectacularly in his face. I can be there, he said. Good. Where? Vivian gestured vaguely at his janitor's uniform, then seemed to reconsider. Actually, wear whatever you'd wear to a professional meeting. Do you have... I have a suit, Ethan said quietly. From before. Before. The word carried so much weight. Before his wife died. Before he became a single father at 28. Before the world narrowed to Maya and survival and midnight mop shifts. Vivian nodded. Then I'll see you tomorrow at 2 p.m. Don't be late. She turned to leave, then stopped. And Ethan? Your uncle? Is he going to be okay? The unexpected kindness in the question nearly undid him. Yes, he managed. Thank you for asking. After she left, Ethan stood alone in the vast lobby, still holding his mop, his mind reeling. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., he would walk into a conference room as something other than invisible. The thought terrified him, but not as much as the thought of staying invisible forever. The next morning, Ethan woke at 5 a.m. to Maya's small hand shaking his shoulder. Daddy, you were making noises again. He sat up, disoriented, the dream already fading, something about being trapped in a glass box, speaking languages nobody could hear. Maya stood beside his bed in her unicorn pajamas, her dark hair a tangled halo around her face. Sorry, sweetheart. Did I wake you? It's okay. She climbed onto the bed, settling against his side with the ease of long practice. Are you worried about something? At 7 years old, Maya had developed an unsettling ability to read his moods. Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Just thinking about work, he said, which was true enough. The mopping work or the other work? He smiled despite himself. There might be some other work today. We'll see. They went through their morning routine with practiced efficiency. Cereal and toast for breakfast, French braids for Maya's hair, Ethan had learned via YouTube tutorial. Backpack check, lunchbox packed. By 7:15, they were walking the 4 blocks to Monroe Elementary, their breath forming clouds in the crisp October air. Mrs. Chen is teaching us about butterflies today, Maya chattered, skipping beside him. Did you know some butterflies migrate thousands of miles? Like they fly from Canada all the way to Mexico. That's amazing, Ethan said, matching her enthusiasm even as his mind spun through potential disasters for the afternoon meeting. What if his language skills were rustier than he thought? What if this was some elaborate test he was destined to fail? At the school gates, Maya hugged him tight. Love you, Daddy. Don't forget, you're picking me up today, right? Not Mrs. Patterson? I'll be here, Ethan promised. The meeting was at 2 p.m. If it ran long, no, he couldn't think that way. He'd make it work. He always did. After dropping Maya off, Ethan rode the bus to his tiny apartment and retrieved the suit from the back of his closet. Navy blue, slightly outdated, but well made. He'd bought it for his master's thesis defense 6 years ago, back when he'd believed the world was opening up for him instead of closing down. He tried it on, standing in front of the bathroom mirror. The jacket still fit, though his shoulders had gotten broader from manual labor. The man looking back at him seemed like a stranger, professional, capable, nothing like the invisible janitor who'd mopped floors the night before. Ethan arrived at the Grand Meridian at 1:45 p.m., his stomach tight with nerves. The daytime lobby buzzed with activity, guests checking in, bellhops wheeling luggage, executives striding past with phones pressed to their ears. He felt exposed in his suit, like he was wearing a costume. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt endless. When the doors opened, he followed the signs to Conference Room B, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The door was closed. Through the glass panel, he could see people already seated. A woman in a sharp gray suit, 2 men in expensive-looking blazers, and at the head of the table, Vivian Hart. Ethan checked his watch, 1:58 p.m. He took a breath, straightened his tie, and knocked. Vivian looked up and gestured him inside. Right on time. "Everyone, this is Ethan Cole. He'll be handling translation for today's meeting." The woman in gray, Dutch, Ethan guessed from her accent when she said hello, extended her hand. "Pleased to meet you. I'm Anneke Vanderberg, representing the Hofstede Group." "Ian genoegen u te ontmoeten," Ethan replied smoothly. "The pleasure is mine." Anneke's eyebrows rose. "Your accent is excellent. Amsterdam?" 2 years at UVA, Ethan confirmed. The 2 men introduced themselves, Klaus Becker from a German manufacturing firm and Li Wei from a Chinese investment company. As they settled into chairs, Ethan caught Vivian's slight nod of approval. The meeting began. For the first hour, it was straightforward. Discussions of partnership terms, market analyses, projected growth. Ethan moved between languages with an ease that felt like coming home, his brain lighting up in ways it hadn't in years. Dutch to English for Anneke's concerns about European regulations. German to Mandarin when Klaus needed clarification on Li Wei's proposed timeline. He anticipated needs before they were voiced, smoothing over linguistic gaps before they could become misunderstandings. But then Klaus pulled out a contract addendum, and Ethan's stomach dropped. The German text was dense, full of legal terminology and industry-specific jargon. Klaus began reading aloud, and Ethan translated in real time, his mind working frantically to keep pace. Then he hit a phrase that made him stop cold. "Haftungsausschluss bei höherer Gewalt unter Berücksichtigung der vorherigen Benachrichtigungspflicht." The official English translation provided in the documents read, "Liability waiver for force majeure considering the prior notification requirement." But that wasn't quite right. Ethan could hear the subtle difference, could see where the meaning had shifted just enough to create a dangerous ambiguity. The German phrase specifically excluded certain types of force majeure events from the waiver. Natural disasters were covered, but supply chain disruptions weren't. The English translation missed that distinction entirely. He looked up. Li Wei was nodding, clearly believing he understood the terms. Anneke was checking her phone. Vivian was making notes. If this contract went through with the mistranslation intact, the Chinese company would be accepting liability they didn't realize they were taking on. Millions of dollars hung in the balance. Ethan cleared his throat. "Excuse me, I need to flag something." All eyes turned to him. Vivian's gaze sharpened. "The translation here is incomplete," Ethan continued, keeping his voice professional. "The German specifically carves out Lieferkettenunterbrechungen, supply chain disruptions, from the force majeure protections. But the English version doesn't reflect that distinction. Mr. Lee, if you sign this as written, your company assumes full liability for any supply chain issues, even those beyond your control." The room went very quiet. Klaus frowned, pulling the document closer. "The translation was done by your company's legal team." "Then our legal team made a mistake," Ethan said evenly. "Or they didn't catch the nuance, but the discrepancy is there." Li Wei's expression had gone cold. "You are saying this contract would expose my company to significant unplanned risk?" "Yes, sir. Potentially several $1 million worth depending on how the supply chain develops over the next fiscal year." Vivian leaned forward. "Ethan, you're certain about this?" Completely certain. I can show you the exact phrases if you'd like. For the next 20 minutes, the meeting dissolved into intense discussion. Klaus confirmed that Ethan's interpretation was correct. The German parent company had indeed intended to exclude supply chain issues, but someone in the translation chain had missed it. Li Wei's whole demeanor shifted from cautiously optimistic to deeply skeptical. If such a basic error exists here, Li Wei said carefully, what other errors might we find in the full agreement? Annika jumped in, her Dutch accent thickening with stress. Perhaps we should postpone until all documents can be properly reviewed. No, Vivian's voice cut through the chaos. We're not postponing. Ethan, I want you to go through every line of this contract, all 3 languages, right now. Find every discrepancy. Ethan blinked. Ms. Hart, that could take hours. Then we'll be here for hours. This deal represents a $50 million partnership. I'm not letting it collapse because someone in our legal department got lazy with translation. She looked around the table. Does anyone object to taking the time to get this right? Slowly, heads shook. Li Wei nodded. I appreciate the thoroughness. Ethan pulled the contract toward him and began to read. By the time he finished, it was after 6 p.m. He'd found 7 significant discrepancies, not just in the German, but in the Mandarin version as well, which had somehow conflated 2 different types of intellectual property protections. Each error could have cost millions. Each one would have slowly poisoned the partnership until it collapsed in litigation. The executives looked shaken. Vivian looked furious. Who handled these translations? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. The documents came through the International Relations Department, Annika offered, hesitantly. I believe they were outsourced to a firm called Langbridge Solutions. Langbridge. Vivian pulled out her phone, typed something, and her expression hardened. We've paid them over $400,000 in the past 2 years. For this. She gestured at the marked-up contracts. And if Ethan hadn't been here, we would have signed off on a deal that could have destroyed this partnership before it even began. Klaus gathered his papers. Ms. Hart, I think perhaps we should reconvene next week. Give everyone time to properly review the corrected versions. Agreed, Li Wei added. And I would like Mr. Cole involved in that review, if possible. His attention to detail is impressive. After the executives left, Vivian and Ethan remained alone in the conference room. The city lights twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago spreading out below them like a carpet of stars. You just saved this company from a catastrophic mistake, Vivian said finally. You understand that, right? Ethan shrugged, suddenly exhausted. I just did what any qualified translator would do. No. Any qualified translator would have caught maybe 2 or 3 of those errors. You caught all 7, and you had the courage to speak up. She paused. That takes more than skill. That takes integrity. The praise felt uncomfortable, unfamiliar. Ethan checked his watch, 6:23 p.m. Maya would be at Mrs. Patterson's by now, probably watching cartoons and wondering where he was. I need to pick up my daughter, he said. Of course, Vivian stood. But, Ethan, we need to talk about your role here. Clearly, you're not meant to be cleaning floors. His heart jumped. Ms. Hart, Tomorrow. Come to my office tomorrow at 10 a.m. We'll discuss it then. She walked to the door, then turned back. And thank you, genuinely. You may have just saved this company millions of dollars. After she left, Ethan sat alone in the conference room for a long moment, his hands trembling slightly. The familiar weight of invisibility had lifted just for an afternoon, and underneath it he'd found something he'd almost forgotten: competence, purpose, the sense that his skills mattered. But as he rode the bus toward Mrs. Patterson's apartment, reality settled back over him like a familiar coat. One good meeting didn't erase 3 years of rejection. One moment of visibility didn't guarantee anything. Still, when he picked up Maya and she threw her arms around his neck, chattering about butterflies and migration patterns, Ethan allowed himself a small smile. Maybe tomorrow wouldn't change everything. But at least for today, someone had seen him. And that was more than he'd had yesterday. The next morning, Ethan arrived at Vivian's office at precisely 10 a.m. Her assistant, a polished woman in her 50s, looked him up and down with barely concealed surprise. You're the janitor, she said, not bothering to make it a question. Ethan Cole, he corrected gently. I have a 10 a.m. with Ms. Hart. The assistant's skepticism didn't waver, but she picked up her phone. Ms. Hart, your appointment is here. A pause. Yes, ma'am. She hung up and gestured to the door. Go ahead. Vivian's office was everything Ethan had imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture, walls covered with photographs of hotel properties from around the world. Vivian herself sat behind a massive desk, reviewing something on her laptop. Sit, she said, not looking up. I'm almost done. Ethan sat in one of the leather chairs facing her desk, trying not to feel like he was waiting for a verdict. Which, in a way, he was. Finally, Vivian closed her laptop and looked at him directly. I spent last night going through your file. Every application, every rejection, every performance review from your janitorial work. She leaned back in her chair. Do you want to know what I found? I'm not sure, Ethan admitted. You've applied for 14 different positions over 3 years. Translator, conference coordinator, guest relations, international partnerships liaison, administrative assistant in the international department. Vivian ticked them off on her fingers. Every single application was rejected at the first HR screening. Do you know why? Gerald said it was because I'm a single parent, reliability concerns. That's what Gerald told you. But that's not what your rejection notices said. Vivian pulled up something on her computer. Quote, candidate does not meet minimum experience requirements for client-facing positions. That was the reason given for every single rejection. Ethan frowned. But I have a master's degree, 2 years of professional translation work in Amsterdam. I know, I saw your resume, which makes these rejections even more interesting. Vivian turned her monitor so he could see the screen. Look at who approved each rejection. Ethan leaned forward. The name appeared again and again. Gerald Moss. Gerald doesn't work in HR, Ethan said slowly. No, but he has friends who do. And apparently, he's been very invested in keeping you exactly where you are. Vivian's expression hardened. I did some more digging. In the past 3 years, we've hired 6 people for positions you were qualified for. Positions you applied for. Want to guess what they all have in common? Ethan shook his head. They're all related to or socially connected to members of our management team. Gerald's nephew got the translator job you applied for in 2022. The operations manager's son-in-law got the conference coordinator role. The pattern continues. Vivian's voice dropped. We've been running a nepotism ring, and it's been keeping qualified people like you out while incompetent connected people fail upward. The room felt too small suddenly, too hot. Ethan thought about all the nights he'd scrubbed floors, telling himself he just needed to be patient, to prove himself, to work harder. And all along, the system had been rigged from the start. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because I'm going to fix it, but I need your help. Vivian stood walking to the windows. We have a major international conference in 2 weeks, the Global Hospitality Summit. 1,500 attendees from 40 countries. It's the biggest event we host all year, and it's absolutely critical for our business development. She turned back to face him. Our head of conference coordination just put in his 2-week notice. Coincidentally, he's Gerald's nephew, the one who got the job you should have had. And based on the preliminary work I've reviewed, he's been doing a spectacularly mediocre job of preparing for this summit. Ethan's pulse quickened. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to step in, coordinate the international aspects of the summit, handle all the translation needs, make sure our foreign guests are properly accommodated, that our international partnerships don't fall through because of preventable communication errors. Vivian returned to her desk. It's 2 weeks of intensive work. You'll report directly to me, and if you succeed, when you succeed, we'll talk about a permanent position. It was everything Ethan had dreamed about for 3 years. It was also terrifying. Ms. Hart, I have a daughter. I can't work around the clock. You'll have regular hours, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. If we need evening work, we'll give you advance notice so you can arrange childcare and we'll pay for it. Vivian named a salary that made Ethan's breath catch. It's temporary, but it's better than what you're making now. And if I fail? Then we'll figure out what went wrong and move forward. But Ethan, I watched you save a $50 million deal yesterday. I don't think failure is your problem. She paused. Your problem is that you've been invisible for so long. You've forgotten what you're capable of. The words hit harder than they should have. Ethan looked down at his hands, calloused from mop handles, scarred from chemical burns. The hands of someone who'd spent 3 years making himself small. When would I start? He asked quietly. Today. Right now. We have 12 days before the summit, and there's a lot of ground to cover. Ethan thought about Maya, about the promises he'd made to always be there for school pickup, for bedtime, for the small moments that made up their life together. But he also thought about the butterflies she'd talked about yesterday, how they migrated thousands of miles, how they transformed, how they became something new. Okay, he said. I'll do it. Vivian smiled, a real smile, not the professional mask she'd worn in the meeting yesterday. Good. Your first task is to meet with the summit planning team at 11 a.m. I'll walk you down and introduce you. But first, she pulled a folder from her desk drawer and slid it across to him. Read this. It's everything the previous coordinator put together. I want your honest assessment of what's salvageable and what needs to be rebuilt from scratch. Ethan opened the folder and began to read. Within 2 pages, his stomach sank. The previous coordinator hadn't just done a mediocre job. He'd created a disaster waiting to happen. The conference room on the 3rd floor smelled like stale coffee and desperation. Ethan stood at the threshold, the disaster folder tucked under his arm, watching 5 people argue around a cluttered table. Papers were scattered everywhere. Printouts with conflicting schedules, vendor contracts with missing signatures, seating charts that made no geographical or political sense. Vivian's hand on his shoulder was gentle but firm. Everyone, I need your attention. The arguments died mid-sentence. A woman with red-framed glasses looked up, her expression shifting from irritation to confusion when she saw Ethan. This is Ethan Cole, Vivian announced. He's taking over international coordination for the summit. Effective immediately, he reports directly to me, and you report to him on all matters related to foreign delegations, translation services, and cross-cultural protocols. The silence that followed was deafening. The woman with red glasses recovered first. I'm sorry, did you say he's taking over? What happened to Brandon? Brandon accepted a position elsewhere, Vivian said smoothly, which Ethan suspected was corporate speak for Brandon was fired an hour ago. Ethan has extensive experience in linguistics and international relations. He'll be bringing us up to standard. A man in his 50s with an impressive mustache leaned back in his chair, studying Ethan with open skepticism. No offense, Ms. Hart, but the summit is in 12 days. We're already behind schedule. Bringing in someone new at this stage is necessary because what you've built so far is fundamentally broken, Vivian interrupted. Her tone was pleasant, but her eyes were steel. Ethan spent the last hour reviewing your planning documents. Ethan, would you like to share your findings? All eyes turned to him. Ethan felt sweat prickle at the back of his neck, but he'd spent the past hour getting angry, and anger was easier to manage than fear. You've seated the Japanese delegation next to the Korean delegation at the opening dinner, he began, pulling out the seating chart. Without considering that several of the Korean attendees represent companies that have active territorial disputes with their Japanese counterparts, you've essentially created a diplomatic incident before the first course is served. The woman with red glasses, her nameplate read Susan Mitchell Event Planning, turned pale. We were trying to group Asian delegations together. Asia isn't a monolith. Ethan cut her off more sharply than he intended. You've also scheduled the opening keynote for 8 a.m. on a Friday, which conflicts with Jumu'ah prayers for our Muslim attendees. Your translation services contract is with a company that doesn't offer Arabic or Farsi, even though you have 40 attendees from Middle Eastern countries. And your welcome packets? He pulled out one of the sample packets. They're only in English and Spanish. No French, no Mandarin, no German. Nothing for the 70% of attendees who list those as their primary languages. The mustached man's face had gone from skeptical to horrified. Jesus Christ. Your dietary accommodation list marks vegetarian and halal as the same thing, Ethan continued, his voice level but relentless. They're not. You've scheduled a wine tasting event during the afternoon session, which excludes not just Muslim attendees, but also several Buddhist delegations and anyone in recovery. And your cultural entertainment for the gala? A mariachi band, which is lovely, except this is a global summit, not a theme party. Susan's hands were shaking. We followed the template from last year. Last year's summit had 300 attendees, mostly from North America and Western Europe, Vivian interjected. This year, we've expanded to 1,500 attendees from 40 countries. The template doesn't scale. A younger woman at the end of the table, her badge read Michelle Torres, Vendor Relations, spoke up quietly. We flagged some of these concerns weeks ago. But Brandon said we didn't have budget for additional translation services or menu modifications. Ethan and Vivian exchanged a look. Show me the budget, Vivian said. Michelle slid a spreadsheet across the table. Ethan scanned it, his jaw tightening with each line. The numbers told a story he'd seen before. Money allocated to flashy, visible elements like elaborate decorations and premium alcohol, while essentials like proper translation equipment and dietary accommodations had been slashed to nothing. You spent $40,000 on ice sculptures, Ethan said flatly, but you've only budgeted $5,000 for interpretation services for a 1,500-person multilingual event. The ice sculptures were Brandon's idea, the mustached man, Robert Palmer, Facilities, muttered. He said they'd make a statement. They'll make a statement, all right, Vivian said. They'll tell our international guests that we care more about Instagram moments than their ability to participate in conversations. She turned to Ethan. What do you need? Ethan's mind raced. 12 days, 1,500 people, 40 countries. The scope was staggering, but he'd coordinated international academic conferences in Amsterdam, had managed communication across 6 languages simultaneously. The muscles were rusty, but they were still there. I need the ice sculptures canceled, he said. That $40,000 gets reallocated to translation equipment, headsets, interpretation booths, real-time transcription services. I need authority to restructure the seating arrangements based on actual diplomatic considerations, not aesthetics. I need the catering contracts reopened so we can provide genuine dietary accommodations, halal, kosher, vegetarian, vegan, gluten-free, the works. Susan was taking notes frantically. What else? I need welcome packets in 6 languages minimum. I need the schedule revised to respect religious observations. I need someone to call every single attendee from a non-English speaking country and ask them directly what accommodations they need. Ethan looked around the table. And I need everyone here to understand that we're not planning a party. We're facilitating communication between people who literally don't speak the same language. If we do this right, business deals get made, partnerships form, careers advance. If we do it wrong, we waste everyone's time and damage this company's reputation internationally. The room was silent. Then Michelle started clapping, slow at first, then genuine. Finally, someone who gets it. Vivian checked her watch. It's 11:30 now. I want a revised plan on my desk by 5 p.m. today. Ethan is in charge. If he asks for something, you give it to him. If you have concerns, you bring them to him first. Are we clear? A chorus of yes, ma'am followed her out the door. As soon as Vivian left, Susan turned to Ethan, her expression a mix of relief and residual panic. Okay, where do we start? Ethan pulled out a chair and sat down. For the first time in 3 years, he was sitting at the table instead of cleaning it. We start with the truth, he said. Michelle, you said you flagged concerns weeks ago. What else did Brandon ignore? What followed was 3 hours of brutal honesty. The team had been terrified of Brandon, who treated any criticism as personal attack and any suggestion as insubordination. He'd canceled meetings, ignored emails, and spent most of his time networking at expensive restaurants while the actual work piled up. But underneath the mismanagement, Ethan found competence. Susan was actually a gifted logistics coordinator. She'd just been overruled at every turn. Robert knew the hotel's physical plant inside and out, and had already identified solutions for accessibility issues Brandon had ignored. Michelle had relationships with vendors who could turn things around quickly if given the chance. By 3 p.m., they had the bones of a new plan. By 5 p.m., Ethan was presenting it to Vivian. You've completely restructured the seating arrangements, Vivian noted, scrolling through the document on her tablet. Based on actual research into each company's partnerships and conflicts, Ethan confirmed. I spent 2 hours on the phone with our international relations contacts, getting insight into who should and shouldn't be near each other. The Japanese and Korean delegations are now on opposite sides of the ballroom, with neutral parties in between. I've clustered people by industry and common interests rather than geography. The schedule's been overhauled. We moved the keynote to 10 a.m. to avoid prayer time conflicts, added a quiet reflection room that can be used for any religious observance, built in longer breaks between sessions so people have time for prayers, phone calls to other time zones, or just decompression. Ethan pulled up another section. I've also added cultural sensitivity briefings for our staff, 15-minute sessions on basics like proper greeting customs, gift-giving protocols, common mistakes to avoid. Vivian looked up. This is thorough. It's necessary. Our staff is going to be the face of this company to 1,500 people from 40 countries. They need to know that bowing is appropriate for Japanese guests, but not for touching their heads, that left-hand gestures can be offensive in some Middle Eastern cultures, that direct eye contact means different things in different places. What about the budget? Canceling the ice sculptures, the premium bar package, and the mariachi band freed up $68,000. I've reallocated $55,000 to translation services, dietary accommodations, and proper welcome materials. The remaining $13,000 is buffer for emergencies. Ethan met her eyes. We'll still have a beautiful event. It just won't be Instagram ready at the expense of being functional. Vivian was quiet for a long moment, reading through the details. Then she signed off on the document with a flourish. Make it happen, she said. Yushi, you have carte blanche. If anyone pushes back, send them to me. Ethan stood to leave, then hesitated. Ms. Hart, can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why did you really give me this chance? You could have hired an outside consultant, brought in someone with recent conference experience. Why take a risk on someone who's been out of the field for years? Vivian leaned back in her chair, considering the question. Do you know what I saw yesterday when you corrected those translation errors? Ethan shook his head. I saw someone who cared more about getting it right than about making people comfortable. You could have stayed quiet. You could have let the mistakes slide and kept your head down. But you spoke up, even though you were the lowest status person in that room. She paused. That kind of integrity can't be taught. And it's exactly what this company needs right now. The words settled over Ethan like a weight and a gift all at once. Thank you, he said quietly. I won't let you down. I know you won't. But as Ethan left her office, headed for the bus stop to pick up Maya, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just painted a target on his back. Somewhere in this building, Gerald Moss was watching his carefully constructed system begin to crack. And men like Gerald didn't give up power quietly. The next week passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Ethan arrived at 7 a.m. every morning, an hour early to get ahead of the avalanche, and left at exactly 5 p.m. to make it to Maya's school on time. The team learned quickly that he meant what he said about regular hours. When Michelle tried to schedule a 6 p.m. vendor call, Ethan simply rescheduled it for the next morning. I have a daughter, he said without apology. My evenings aren't negotiable. To his surprise, no one pushed back. In fact, Susan started leaving at 5 p.m. too, something she admitted she hadn't done in years. Robert began taking actual lunch breaks. The team's productivity somehow increased even as their hours became more reasonable, but not everyone was happy about the changes. On day 4, Ethan was reviewing dietary accommodation requests when his office phone rang. The office itself was small, a converted storage room on the 3rd floor, but it had a door and a window, which was more than he'd had for 3 years. Ethan Cole, he answered. Mr. Cole, this is Richard Pemberton from Legal. The voice was clipped, officious. I need you to come to my office immediately to discuss some concerns about the summit planning. Ethan checked his watch. I have a call with our Mandarin interpretation service in 10 minutes. This can't wait. Something in Pemberton's tone made Ethan's instincts flare. He saved his work, grabbed his notebook, and headed to the legal department on the 5th floor. Richard Pemberton's office was all dark wood and leather chairs, the kind of space designed to intimidate. Pemberton himself was in his 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades wielding authority. Sit, Pemberton said, not bothering with pleasantries. Ethan sat. Through the interior window, he could see other lawyers moving about, but Pemberton's door was firmly closed. "I've been reviewing your proposed changes to the summit," Pemberton began, sliding a printed copy of Ethan's plan across the desk. The pages were covered in red ink. "And I have significant concerns about liability exposure." "What kind of concerns?" "These religious accommodations you're proposing, prayer rooms, schedule modifications, dietary restrictions, they open us up to discrimination claims if we don't execute them perfectly." Pemberton leaned forward. "What happens if someone claims we didn't properly accommodate their needs? What if there's cross-contamination in the kosher meals? What if someone is offended by the presence of a prayer room?" Ethan kept his expression neutral. "The greater liability is in not providing accommodations. That's actual discrimination, not theoretical." "I disagree. The safer approach is to remain neutral, provide the same basic service to everyone, and let individuals make their own arrangements." "That's not neutral," Ethan said carefully. "That's exclusionary. If we only provide food that violates someone's religious practices, only schedule events during their prayer times, only communicate in languages they don't speak, we're effectively telling them they're not welcome." Pemberton's jaw tightened. "I don't think you understand the legal complexities here. I understand that we have 1,500 people coming from 40 countries, and if we treat their cultural and religious needs as liabilities instead of as basic human considerations, we'll lose their business forever." Ethan met Pemberton's gaze. "With respect, sir, which is the bigger risk? Spending money to do this right, or saving money and watching our international reputation collapse?" "You've been in this role for 4 days," Pemberton snapped. "I've been protecting this company's legal interests for 20 years. I think I know better than a janitor playing dress-up how to assess risk." The words hung in the air like a slap. Ethan's hands clenched under the desk, but he kept his voice level. "Then perhaps you should take your concerns to Ms. Hart. She approved every element of this plan." "Oh, I intend to." Pemberton stood, a clear dismissal. "In the meantime, I'm putting a hold on any contracts related to these accommodations until I complete my review." "How long will that take?" "As long as it takes." Ethan left the office with his heart pounding and his mind racing. A hold on the contracts meant the translation equipment wouldn't ship on time, the dietary modifications wouldn't be confirmed, the welcome materials wouldn't go to print. Pemberton had just thrown a wrench into the entire operation. He pulled out his phone and called Vivian's direct line. "We have a problem," he said. 20 minutes later, Ethan sat in Vivian's office while she read through Pemberton's objections, her expression growing darker with each page. "This is bullshit," she said finally. "Richard is covering for someone." "What do you mean?" Vivian pulled up something on her computer. "Richard Pemberton has been with this company for 23 years. He's worked on hundreds of international contracts and events. Never once has he raised religious accommodation as a liability concern. In fact, he's the one who helped us develop our diversity and inclusion policies 5 years ago." She turned the screen toward Ethan. "Someone asked him to slow you down." "Gerald?" "Almost certainly. Richard and Gerald have been golf buddies for years." Vivian picked up her phone. "Diane, get Richard Pemberton in here now. I don't care if he's in a meeting." While they waited, Ethan's phone buzzed. A text from Michelle. "FYI, Gerald just showed up asking about summit planning. Told him to talk to you. He looked pissed." "Gerald's making moves," Ethan said, showing Vivian the text. "Let him. He's about to find out what happens when you corner me." Vivian's smile was sharp. Pemberton arrived 3 minutes later, slightly out of breath. "Ms. Hart, I was just about to call you." "Sit down, Richard." Vivian's tone could have frozen nitrogen. "I want you to explain to me why you're suddenly concerned about religious accommodations when you've never raised this issue in 23 years. Pemberton's confident demeanor faltered. The scale of this event is unprecedented." "The scale is larger. The principles are the same." Vivian pulled up a document. "This is from the 2019 Asia-Pacific Summit that you personally handled. Quote, recommended accommodations include prayer facilities, kosher and halal catering options, and multilingual signage to ensure all attendees feel welcomed and respected." "Your words, Richard, your recommendation." The color drained from Pemberton's face. "So let's try this again," Vivian continued. "Who asked you to slow down Ethan's planning?" Pemberton was silent for a long moment. Then quietly, Gerald suggested I review the plans carefully. He was concerned about budget overruns and mentioned that the new coordinator might not understand all the complexities involved. Gerald Moss is a facilities manager. He has no authority over legal reviews, budget allocation, or summit planning. Vivian's voice was ice. And you, Richard, should have known better than to let personal relationships interfere with your professional judgment. I apologize, Ms. Hart. It won't happen again. You're right. It won't. Because you're going to lift the hold on those contracts right now, and you're going to stay out of Ethan's way unless he specifically requests legal consultation. Vivian leaned forward. And Richard, the next time Gerald or anyone else asks you to sabotage an employee, you come directly to me. Are we clear? Crystal clear, ma'am. After Pemberton left, Ethan exhaled slowly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This was just the opening salvo. Vivian pulled up her email. Gerald knows he's losing control, which makes him dangerous. He's going to escalate. What do I do? Your job. Document everything, every conversation, every decision, every success. Build a paper trail so thorough that when Gerald tries to undermine you, the evidence speaks for itself. She looked at him seriously. And Ethan, watch your back. Gerald has been running his little kingdom for 8 years. He won't give it up without a fight. That night, after tucking Maya into bed and listening to her excited chatter about her school's upcoming science fair, Ethan sat at his tiny kitchen table and made a list of everything that could still go wrong. The summit was 8 days away. They'd made incredible progress, but there were still dozens of moving parts, hundreds of details that could unravel with one mistake. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You should quit while you're ahead. Some battles aren't worth fighting. Ethan stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. He'd spent 3 years being invisible, being dismissed, being told to know his place. He wasn't going back to that. Not for Gerald. Not for anyone. He pulled out his laptop and kept working, refining schedules and double-checking arrangements until his eyes burned and the coffee had gone cold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new obstacles. But tonight, he'd proven something important. He was still here, still fighting, still visible, and he had no intention of disappearing again. The threatening text message turned out to be just the beginning. Over the next 3 days, small acts of sabotage began appearing like landmines across Ethan's carefully constructed plans. A vendor suddenly claimed they'd never received the updated catering specifications, even though Ethan had the email confirmation with timestamps. The interpretation equipment delivery was mysteriously rescheduled for 2 days after the summit was supposed to start. 3 of the international attendees received emails, allegedly from Ethan, telling them their dietary requests couldn't be accommodated and they should make other arrangements. Ethan caught each problem before it exploded, but only barely, and only because he'd started triple-checking everything. The stress was eating through his sleep, leaving him hollow-eyed and running on caffeine and sheer stubbornness. On day 7, 5 days before the summit, Susan burst into his office without knocking, her face pale. "We have a crisis," she said. "The German delegation just called. They're threatening to cancel." Ethan's stomach dropped. The German contingent represented 12 companies and nearly 80 attendees, the second largest group after the Americans. Losing them would be catastrophic. What happened? Susan handed him her phone, opened to an email. Ethan read it, his jaw tightening with each line. Someone had sent the Germans a preliminary schedule, not the updated, corrected version Ethan had created, but Brandon's original plan with all its diplomatic disasters intact. The email claimed this was the final confirmed schedule and apologized for any previous miscommunications. "Who sent this?" Ethan demanded. "It came from a company email address, but the signature is weird, just Summit Planning Team, no specific name." Ethan pulled up the email headers on his computer, tracing the digital fingerprints. The message had originated from a terminal in the facilities department. Gerald's domain. "Get Klaus Becker on the phone," Ethan said, referring to the head of the German delegation he'd met during that first translation meeting. "I'll handle this." 10 minutes later, Ethan was on a video call with Klaus, whose expression was somewhere between furious and resigned. "Mr. Cole, I must be honest with you," Klaus said in crisp English. "We have significant concerns about your company's organizational capabilities. First we receive one schedule, then corrections, now this new version that appears to ignore all the changes you promised. It suggests a level of incompetence we cannot afford to associate with. Herr Becker, I completely understand your frustration, Ethan replied, then switched smoothly to German. But what you received is not from me or my team. It's sabotage. Someone within this company trying to undermine the summit because they're threatened by the changes we're implementing. Klaus's eyebrows rose slightly at the German, but he responded in kind. Sabotage is a strong accusation. It's the truth, and I can prove it. Ethan pulled up the email headers and shared his screen. Look at the origin point. This came from our facilities department, which has no role in summit planning. The person responsible has been systematically blocked qualified employees from advancement and has been running a nepotism network. When Ms. Hart started cleaning house, he began fighting back. And you were caught in the middle. I'm not just caught in the middle. I'm the target. Because I'm the evidence that his system was broken. Ethan leaned forward. Herr Becker, I'm sending you the actual final schedule right now, along with my personal mobile number. If you receive any communication about the summit that seems inconsistent or problematic, call me directly. Don't trust emails from generic addresses. Don't trust anything that doesn't come from me or Ms. Hart personally. Klaus was quiet for a moment, studying Ethan through the screen. You are either very brave or very foolish to make such an offer. I'm a single father who spent 3 years mopping floors because men like the one sabotaging this summit decided I wasn't worth their time. I have nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Ethan met his gaze steadily. I give you my word. The summit will run smoothly. Your delegation will be respected and accommodated. And if anything goes wrong, I will fix it personally, even if I have to work 24 hours straight to do it. The line was silent except for the faint hum of the connection. Then Klaus smiled slightly. I believe you, Mr. Cole. We will attend the summit, but I will hold you to that promise. After the call ended, Ethan sat back in his chair, his hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. Susan had been listening from the doorway. That was either the gutsiest thing I've ever seen or the craziest, she said. Probably both. Ethan pulled up his email. But we can't keep playing defense. It's time to go on offense. He spent the next hour documenting every act of sabotage, the rescheduled deliveries, the fake emails, the mysterious vendor miscommunications. Then he compiled the evidence into a single file and sent it to Vivian with a subject line that read, "We need to talk about Gerald, now." Vivian called him 30 seconds later. "My office, bring everything." When Ethan arrived, he found Vivian pacing behind her desk like a caged tiger, her usual composure cracked by visible anger. "I just got off the phone with our head of HR," she said without preamble. "Gerald filed a formal complaint against you this morning. He's claiming you've been harassing him, undermining his authority, and creating a hostile work environment." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. "That's insane." "I know, which is why I had HR pull all the records." Vivian gestured to her computer. "Gerald has filed 17 complaints in the past 8 years, every single one against employees who threatened his little empire. 3 of them were forced out. The others quit before it got that far. He uses the HR system as a weapon. So what do? We end this. Today." Vivian picked up her phone. "Diane, I need an emergency meeting with Gerald Moss, Richard Pemberton, Helen Zhang from HR, and our VP of Operations. Conference room A, 20 minutes. She hung up and looked at Ethan. "Bring your evidence. We're burning this down." 20 minutes later, Ethan sat at a conference table that felt more like a tribunal. Helen Zhang, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, sat with a thick file of documents. Beside her was James Wright, the VP of Operations, a broad-shouldered man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Gerald sat across from Ethan, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes were pure venom. Richard Pemberton occupied the far end of the table, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Vivian stood at the head of the table and didn't bother sitting down. "We're here because this company has a problem," she began, "and that problem is systemic discrimination, nepotism, and active sabotage of business operations. Gerald, you filed a harassment complaint against Ethan this morning. I'd like to hear your allegations." Gerald straightened, putting on a performance of wounded dignity. "Ms. Hart, I've been with this company for 8 years. I've always put the business first. But Mr. Cole has been consistently disrespectful, has gone around proper channels, has made decisions without consulting the established management structure. Which decisions? Vivian interrupted. He canceled contracts without authorization. He restructured the summit budget without approval. He's been making promises to international clients that he has no authority to make. He canceled an ice sculpture contract that was wasteful and inappropriate, Vivian corrected. He restructured a budget that I personally approved, and he made promises to clients on my explicit instruction. What else? Gerald's confidence wavered slightly. He's created division among the staff. People who used to report to me are now going to him directly. Because you've been blocking them from doing their jobs effectively for years. Vivian pulled up something on the screen behind her, the organizational chart with red lines highlighting reporting relationships. Helen, how many formal complaints have been filed against Gerald in the past 5 years? Helen consulted her notes. 17 formal complaints, 23 informal concerns brought to HR's attention but not officially filed. And what were these complaints about? Harassment, discrimination, blocking promotions, creating hostile work environments, nepotism, retaliation against employees who questioned his decisions. Helen's voice was flat, professional. The complaints follow a pattern. Employees who challenged Gerald's authority or who were more qualified than his preferred candidates consistently faced retaliation. James Wright leaned forward. Ms. Hart, with respect, I've reviewed Gerald's performance evaluations over the years. He's consistently rated as satisfactory or above. By whom? Ethan asked quietly. Wright blinked. Excuse me? Who conducted those performance evaluations? Who rated him as satisfactory? Ethan pulled out his own documentation. Because I pulled the records. Every single evaluation for the past 6 years was conducted by either Richard Pemberton or by managers who were personal friends of Gerald. No independent reviews. No objective assessments from people outside his social circle. Richard Pemberton shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Furthermore, Ethan continued, his voice gaining strength, I have documentation of 12 employees who applied for positions they were qualified for and were rejected in favor of less qualified candidates who had personal connections to Gerald. 3 of those employees eventually left the company. 2 filed discrimination complaints with the EEOC that the company quietly settled. The cost of those settlements, combined with recruitment expenses for replacing lost talent, exceeds $300,000. The room went very quiet. That's not all, Ethan said. He pulled up the email headers from the sabotage attempts. Over the past week, someone has been actively trying to destroy the summit planning. Fake emails sent to international delegations. Vendor contracts mysteriously changed. Critical deliveries rescheduled. Every single instance traces back to terminals in the facilities department or to email accounts accessible to Gerald and his associates. This is speculation, Gerald said, but his voice had lost its conviction. Anyone could have accessed those terminals. The systems require badge access, Helen interjected, consulting her laptop. I pulled the security logs. Gerald, your badge was used to access the facilities department terminal at 11:47 p.m. on Tuesday, 15 minutes before the fake email was sent to the German delegation. Your badge was also used to access the procurement system at 9:23 a.m. on Wednesday, exactly when the interpretation equipment delivery was rescheduled. Gerald's face had gone from red to ashen. I was doing routine checks. At midnight, Vivian's voice was deadly calm. Gerald, I'm going to give you one chance to be honest. Did you send those emails? Did you sabotage the summit planning? The silence stretched out like a wire pulled taut. Ethan could see the calculation in Gerald's eyes, whether to keep lying, whether to deflect, whether to cut his losses. Finally, Gerald's shoulders sagged. I was trying to protect this company from a mistake. What mistake? Putting an inexperienced janitor in charge of the most important event we host all year. The words burst out like they'd been held back too long. You gave him authority he hasn't earned, responsibilities he can't handle. I was trying to make you see that before he destroyed everything we've built. Everything you've built, Vivian corrected softly. Your little kingdom where qualifications don't matter as much as connections, where talent gets buried because it threatens your control. That's not, yes, it is. Vivian pulled up more documents. Over the past 8 years, under your influence, This hotel's international business has declined by 32%. Guest satisfaction scores from non-English speaking visitors are down 41%. We've lost major contracts to competitors who actually invest in cultural competency and language services. You've been costing this company millions while protecting your authority. James Wright was reading through the data on his tablet, his expression growing darker. Gerald, is this accurate? The hospitality industry is changing, Gerald said defensively. Those numbers are industry-wide. Our competitors' numbers are up, Vivian interrupted. The industry is growing. We're shrinking because we've been hamstrung by management that prioritizes personal power over business results. Helen closed her folder with a decisive snap. Ms. Hart, based on the evidence presented, the sabotage, the pattern of retaliation, the demonstrated harm to business operations, I'm recommending immediate termination for cause. Gerald shot to his feet. You can't do this. I have friends on this board. I have relationships with major vendors. I have 20 years of hospitality experience. You have 8 years of documented misconduct, Vivian said flatly. Helen, prepare the termination paperwork. James, I want a full audit of every hiring decision, vendor contract, and budget allocation Gerald has influenced over the past 5 years. Richard, since you enabled some of this behavior, you're going to personally oversee the legal review to make sure we're protected from wrongful termination claims. And if you find any weaknesses in our case, you're going to fix them. Richard nodded, chastened. Yes, ma'am. As for you, Gerald, Vivian continued, her voice cold, you're suspended immediately pending formal termination. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. You're not to contact any current employees, access any company systems, or set foot on company property. If you violate these terms, we'll pursue legal action for sabotage and breach of fiduciary duty. This is illegal, Gerald sputtered. I'll sue for wrongful termination. I'll go to the press. You'll do what you think is necessary, Vivian said. But Gerald, if you want to air this publicly, I'll release every piece of evidence we have, every nepotistic hire, every blocked promotion, every settlement we paid because of your retaliation. I'll show the world exactly what kind of manager you were. Is that really the legacy you want? The fight went out of Gerald like air from a punctured tire. He looked around the table, at Helen's impassive face, at James's disgust, at Richard's careful neutrality, at Ethan's quiet presence. No allies, no escape routes, no more kingdom. I want severance, he said finally, his voice hollow. I want a neutral reference. I want my retirement contributions protected. We'll discuss terms with your attorney, Helen said. But you're done here, today. Security arrived 5 minutes later. Ethan watched them escort Gerald from the conference room, the man who'd controlled his fate for 3 years, reduced to carrying a cardboard box of personal effects and avoiding eye contact with everyone he passed. After he left, the room exhaled collectively. Ethan, Vivian said, and her voice was gentler now. Are you okay? He realized his hands were shaking. 3 years of anger, frustration, and humiliation were trying to process themselves all at once, and his body didn't quite know what to do with the sudden absence of the threat that had loomed over everything. I think so, he managed. You did well. The documentation you provided was crucial. Vivian looked at James and Helen. I want full transparency on this. Ethan, you'll have access to all the findings from the audit. If you identify other employees who were harmed by Gerald's actions, I want to know. We're going to make this right. James stood, extending his hand to Ethan. I owe you an apology. I should have caught this years ago. I reviewed Gerald's evaluations and took them at face value instead of digging deeper. Ethan shook his hand. A lot of people missed it. That's how these systems work. They're designed to be invisible until someone finally looks. After the others left, Ethan remained in the conference room with Vivian, the adrenaline finally starting to fade. The summit is in 4 days, he said. I need to make sure Gerald didn't plant any other surprises. You need to take the rest of the day off, Vivian corrected. You've been running on fumes for a week. Go home. Be with your daughter. Tomorrow, you can come back and do a final security sweep. But that's not a request, Ethan. You're no good to me or the summit if you collapse from exhaustion. She smiled slightly. Besides, you just helped me remove a cancer that's been eating at this company for years. You've earned a few hours apiece. Ethan left the building in a daze, the afternoon sunlight feeling surreal after the fluorescent intensity of the conference room. He picked up Maya from school early, something he never did, and her face lit up with surprise and delight when she saw him at the gate. "Daddy, why are you here? Is something wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," he said, and realized it was true. For the first time in 3 years, nothing was fundamentally wrong. "I just wanted to spend the afternoon with you. What do you say we get ice cream?" They went to the park, ate ice cream that dripped down their fingers in the unseasonable warmth, and Maya told him elaborate stories about the butterflies her class was studying and her plans for the science fair. Ethan listened with the kind of presence he hadn't been able to afford in years, not worrying about the next shift or the next bill or the next humiliation. "Daddy, you look different today," Maya said, studying him with her two perceptive eyes. "Different how?" "Lighter. Like when you swing me and you're not afraid you'll drop me." The observation hit him harder than it should have. How much had his daughter noticed? How much had she absorbed of his stress, his fear, his quiet desperation? "I think things are getting better," he told her honestly. "Work is getting better. We're going to be okay." Maya nodded seriously, then went back to her ice cream. But she held his hand a little tighter as they walked home, and Ethan felt something in his chest that had been clenched for years finally begin to loosen. That night, after Maya was asleep, Ethan sat at his kitchen table and opened his laptop one more time. There were still details to check, arrangements to confirm, potential problems to anticipate. But when he pulled up the summit schedule, his schedule, built from competence and care instead of nepotism and negligence, he felt something close to pride. The text he'd received days ago had warned him that some battles weren't worth fighting. But as Ethan reviewed the names of 1,500 attendees from 40 countries, each one representing a person who deserved to be welcomed and understood, he knew this battle had been worth every sleepless night. Because it wasn't just about the summit. It wasn't even just about his career. It was about proving that talent mattered more than connections, that integrity mattered more than politics, that the invisible people cleaning floors and raising children and holding everything together deserved to be seen. The summit was 4 days away. Gerald was gone. The threats had been neutralized, but Ethan knew better than to get complacent. He'd torn down one barrier, but systems built over years didn't collapse overnight. Somewhere in this company, there were other Gerald Mosses, other Richard Pembertons, other people invested in keeping things exactly as they were. But Ethan had something they didn't. He had nothing left to lose, and he had everything to prove. He closed his laptop and went to bed, the closest thing to peace settling over him like a blanket. In 4 days, 1,500 people would arrive in Chicago expecting a world-class experience. And if Ethan had anything to say about it, that's exactly what they'd get. Not because of ice sculptures or premium liquor or Instagram-worthy aesthetics, but because someone had finally cared enough to see them as they actually were. Human beings speaking different languages, following different customs, deserving the same basic dignity and respect. The summit would be Ethan's proof. Not just to Vivian or to the company, but to himself. Proof that he hadn't been wrong to hope, to fight, to refuse to stay invisible. Proof that talent, given a chance, could still rise. And proof that sometimes the person mopping the floor was the most qualified person in the room all along. The morning of the summit arrived with the kind of crisp November clarity that felt like a gift from the universe. Ethan stood in the Grand Meridian's lobby at 6 a.m., watching the transformation his team had orchestrated over 72 sleepless hours. Where Brandon's plan had called for generic corporate branding, there were now welcome displays in 6 languages, each professionally translated and culturally vetted. The registration desk had been reorganized into linguistic clusters, with staff members wearing discrete badges indicating which languages they spoke. In the corner that had been slated for an ice sculpture, there was instead a quiet reflection room with prayer mats, meditation cushions, and a schedule of religious observance times posted in multiple languages. Susan arrived with 2 cups of coffee, handing one to Ethan without a word. They stood together, surveying their work like generals before a battle. "The interpretation booths are all tested and functioning," Susan reported. "The catering team confirmed all dietary accommodations are separated and labeled. Michelle has the welcome packets organized by delegation. Robert says the accessibility routes are all clear and marked. Contingency plans? 3 backup interpreters on call, emergency catering vendor on standby, extra prayer mats in storage. Medical team briefed on common religious and cultural considerations for treatment. Susan checked her tablet. We've planned for every disaster I can imagine and several I can't. Ethan took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle his nerves. First attendees arrive in 90 minutes. Then we'd better get everyone in position. The team had grown over the past 4 days. After Gerald's removal, word had spread through the company's lower ranks like wildfire, and employees who'd been sidelined or overlooked had started volunteering to help. Ethan now had a small army of people who understood what this summit represented. Not just a business event, but proof that competence and dedication could triumph over nepotism and exclusion. Maria Chen, a housekeeper who spoke fluent Mandarin and Cantonese, had volunteered to help with Chinese delegation relations. David Okonkwo, a parking attendant with a degree in international relations from Nigeria, was coordinating African business leaders. Even Tom Bradley, the night security guard who'd watched Ethan mop floors for 3 years, had offered to help with logistics, revealing he'd been a Marine sergeant who'd coordinated multinational operations. They were an unconventional team, assembled from the ranks of the invisible, and Ethan trusted them more than any polished consultants. By 7:30 a.m., the first international delegates began arriving. Ethan watched a group of Japanese businessmen approach the registration desk, saw Maria greet them in perfect Japanese, saw their faces shift from wary to pleased. A delegation from Dubai arrived moments later, and David smoothly directed them to the reflection room where they could perform morning prayers before the opening session. Each small success felt like a victory. Each moment of genuine welcome felt like proof. But the real test came at 9 a.m. when Klaus Becker arrived with the full German contingent. Ethan was at the main entrance to greet them personally, as promised. "Guten Morgen, Herr Becker," Ethan said, extending his hand. "Welcome to Chicago." Klaus's handshake was firm, his expression cautiously optimistic. "Mr. Cole, I see you've been busy." "We had a lot to prove." Ethan gestured to the welcome display in German, the staff members ready to assist in their language, the carefully planned seating arrangements visible through the ballroom doors. "I hope we've succeeded." Klaus looked around, taking in the details. The translated signage, the cultural sensitivity evident in every choice. The clear organization. His stern features softened slightly. "I must admit, I had doubts," he said. "But this is impressive. Truly impressive." Over the next hour, 1,500 people flooded into the Grand Meridian from 40 countries, and Ethan's team moved like a well-oiled machine. When the Saudi delegation needed a space for dua prayers, Tom had it ready in minutes. When a Chinese executive couldn't find his dietary accommodation card, Maria located it and personally verified his meals were prepared correctly. When a French delegate's interpreter failed to show, Ethan himself stepped in seamlessly. The opening session was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the Grand Ballroom, and as the attendees filed in, Ethan stood at the back of the room with Susan, watching their seating arrangements come to life. The Japanese and Korean delegations were on opposite sides, separated by neutral Nordic companies. The Middle Eastern representatives were clustered near the reflection room for easy access. Dietary restrictions had been communicated to the catering staff so thoroughly that each table had customized menus. Vivian took the stage at 10:02, perfectly punctual, looking commanding in a navy suit. Ethan had helped her prepare remarks in 5 languages, opening with English, then offering brief welcomes in Spanish, Mandarin, German, and Arabic. The crowd's response was immediate and warm. People who'd been bracing for the usual English-only American corporate presentation visibly relaxed when they heard their languages honored. "We've gathered here from 40 nations," Vivian said, and Ethan watched the interpretation system relay her words in real time through headsets to those who needed them. "Each of you represents not just business interests, but unique perspectives, cultural wisdom, and the rich diversity that makes global partnership not just profitable, but meaningful. This summit is built on a simple premise, that everyone deserves to be heard in their own language, respected in their own culture, and welcomed as they truly are." Ethan saw Klaus nod approvingly, saw Li Wei from the Chinese investment firm lean forward with interest, saw Annika Vanderberg from the Netherlands smile. But he also saw something else. In the back corner, a cluster of men in expensive suits who looked distinctly uncomfortable with Vivian's message. Ethan recognized 2 of them from Gerald's network, managers who'd benefited from the old system. They weren't applauding, they were whispering among themselves, their expressions dark. The rest of the morning proceeded flawlessly. The breakout sessions ran on schedule, with interpretation services working so smoothly that attendees later commented they'd never experienced better language support at any international conference. The lunch service was executed perfectly, with dietary restrictions honored so carefully that several Muslim attendees made a point of thanking the staff personally. But during the afternoon networking session, as Ethan was checking in with the interpretation team, Michelle found him with worry creased across her forehead. "We have a problem," she said quietly. "Gordon Hastings from finance just cornered 3 of the Asian delegates. He's asking them pointed questions about why they need special accommodations and whether they wouldn't prefer normal American food." Ethan's jaw tightened. Gordon Hastings was one of Gerald's golf buddies, a finance director who'd been notably absent from the summit planning process. "Where is he now?" "Conference room C. He's got them trapped in there, and they look really uncomfortable." Ethan moved quickly, Susan following. Through the glass wall of conference room C, he could see Gordon, a florid man in his 60s with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, holding court while 3 Japanese executives sat with the polite, frozen expressions of people enduring an unpleasant experience. Ethan opened the door. "Mr. Hastings, may I speak with you outside?" Gordon barely glanced at him. "I'm in the middle of a conversation." "I can see that, which is why I need to speak with you now." Something in Ethan's tone made Gordon pause. He excused himself with exaggerated courtesy and followed Ethan into the hallway, his expression shifting to condescension the moment they were out of earshot. "Listen, I don't know who you think you are," Gordon began, "but I've been with this company for 15 years, and I don't take orders from the person coordinating this summit under Ms. Hart's direct authority," Ethan interrupted. "The person she put in charge of ensuring every attendee is treated with respect and professionalism." "These people are guests in our country," Gordon said, his voice rising. "If they can't handle normal food and normal schedules, maybe they shouldn't—" "Stop talking." Ethan's voice was quiet, but it carried steel. "Right now, you're going to listen. Those people represent approximately $200 million in potential business partnerships. They're executives from some of the largest corporations in Asia, and you just insulted them by implying their cultural and religious practices are inconvenient preferences." "I didn't insult anyone. I just asked some questions." "You asked why they need special accommodations." "That's not a question. That's an accusation disguised as curiosity." Ethan stepped closer. "You're going to go back to your office, and you're going to stay there for the rest of the summit. You're not going to approach any international delegates. You're not going to attend any sessions. You're done." Gordon's face turned purple. "You can't order me around. I'm a director, and you're a jumped-up janitor playing dress-up. I'm going to Vivian about this." "Good idea." Ethan pulled out his phone and called Vivian's direct line. She answered on the second ring. "Ms. Hart, I'm in the 3rd-floor hallway with Gordon Hastings. He just interrogated several Japanese delegates about their dietary accommodations in a way that made them visibly uncomfortable. I've asked him to remove himself from the summit. He's refusing." Vivian's voice came through crystal clear and cold enough to frost the phone. "Put him on speaker." Ethan did. Gordon's bluster faltered. "Gordon," Vivian said, "you have 2 choices. You can go to your office now and stay there, or you can be escorted out by security and face a formal review for conduct detrimental to business operations. Choose." "Oh, Vivian, this is ridiculous. I was just making conversation." "You were making our guests uncomfortable at an event where their comfort and respect is literally the entire point." Vivian's tone was final. "Your office, now. We'll discuss your conduct on Monday." The call ended. Gordon looked at Ethan with pure hatred, but he turned and walked toward the elevators without another word. Susan had been standing nearby, and she let out a breath. That was satisfying to watch. "It was necessary," Ethan corrected, though he felt the adrenaline shaking through his hands. "Can you check on the Japanese delegates? Make sure they're okay and apologize on behalf of the company?" "Already on it." The rest of the afternoon passed without incident, but Ethan could feel the tension building. Gerald's network was still embedded in the company structure. and they were watching their power base crumble with each successful interaction, each grateful delegate, each moment that proved the new approach worked better than their old gatekeeping. The evening gala was the summit's centerpiece, a formal dinner with keynote addresses and networking designed to cement the partnerships formed throughout the day. Ethan had personally overseen every detail, from the table arrangements to the entertainment to the timing of courses to respect prayer schedules. As guests began arriving in formal wear, the ballroom glowed with warm light, elegant without being ostentatious. Instead of a mariachi band, they'd hired a classical quartet that could shift between Western, Eastern, and Middle Eastern musical traditions. The tables were set with place cards in each guest's native language. Ethan stood near the entrance in his suit, the same navy suit he'd worn to his thesis defense, now pressed and paired with the tie Maya had helped him choose that morning. He was checking the seating chart one final time when Vivian appeared at his elbow, stunning in a black evening gown. "It's perfect," she said quietly. "Every detail. Perfect." "We'll see," Ethan replied, his mind already running through contingency plans. The night's not over yet. But as dinner progressed, even Ethan had to admit it was going remarkably well. Conversations flowed across tables, facilitated by the interpretation equipment for those who needed it. The food service was flawless, kosher meals clearly marked, halal preparation certified, vegan options abundant, everything labeled in multiple languages. When the call to Maghrib prayers came during the salad course, the Saudi delegation was able to excuse themselves discreetly to the reflection room and return without missing the main course. Klaus Becker found Ethan during the dessert service, a genuine smile on his usually stern face. "Mr. Cole, I owe you an apology," Klaus said. "When we spoke last week, I believed you, but I didn't truly expect this level of execution. This is the finest international conference I've attended in 20 years. Thank you, Herr Becker. That means a great deal." "I'm not the only one who thinks so." Klaus gestured around the room. "I've been speaking with the other delegation heads. We're all impressed. Several have already asked me about booking events here for next year." Li Wei joined them. His earlier skepticism completely vanished. "Mr. Cole, I want to introduce you to someone." He gestured to a distinguished older woman in an elegant qipao. "This is Zhang Mei, CEO of Pacific Rim Hospitality Group. She owns 43 hotels across Asia." Zhang Mei extended her hand, and when she spoke, it was in Mandarin. "Mr. Lai tells me you personally corrected the translation errors that could have destroyed our partnership, and that you speak Mandarin?" Ethan responded fluidly in Mandarin, and her eyes lit up with appreciation. They spoke for several minutes about translation challenges in the hospitality industry, about cultural sensitivity in international business, about the difficulty of finding people who understood both language and context. "We need someone like you in our organization," Zhang Mei said finally, switching to English so Li Wei could follow. "Would you consider consulting for us? We're expanding into European markets and need someone who understands both Eastern and Western business culture." Ethan's heart jumped, but before he could respond, Vivian materialized beside them. "Ms. Zhang, Mr. Cole is a valued member of my team," Vivian said smoothly, "though I'm flattered you recognize his talents. Perhaps we could discuss a partnership between our companies instead?" Zhang Mei smiled, recognizing a polite territorial claim when she heard one. "I think that could be very productive. Mr. Cole, I hope you'll be involved in those discussions." "I'd be honored," Ethan managed. As Zhang Mei moved on to network with other attendees, Li Wei leaned in conspiratorially. "She doesn't make offers like that lightly. You've impressed some very important people tonight." After Li Wei left, Vivian turned to Ethan with an expression he couldn't quite read. "We need to talk about your future here," she said, "but not tonight. Tonight you should enjoy what you've built." The keynote address was delivered by a former UN ambassador who spoke about the power of cultural understanding in global business. As Ethan listened, he looked around the ballroom at 1,500 people from 40 countries, all engaged, all respected, all welcomed exactly as they were. He thought about the threatening text messages, about Gerald's sabotage attempts, about all the people who'd tried to keep him invisible. They'd failed. Spectacularly. After the speech, as guests mingled over coffee and after-dinner drinks, Annika Vanderberg approached Ethan with several other European delegates. "Mr. Cole, we've been discussing something," Annika said. We want to ensure Ms. Hart knows that you are the reason this summit succeeded. Not just your language skills, though those are impressive. Your cultural intelligence, your attention to detail, your genuine respect for each delegation. She paused. In our feedback forms, many of us are specifically requesting that you coordinate next year's summit. I appreciate that, Ethan said, genuinely touched. Though I have to give credit to an incredible team. Yes, team effort, Annika interrupted with a smile. But teams need leaders who understand the mission. You understand. We can tell. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Ethan finally allowed himself to breathe. The summit had been a success, not just functional, but genuinely excellent. Delegates were exchanging contact information, scheduling follow-up meetings, already planning for next year. The business development team would be processing new partnership inquiries for months. He found Susan helping coordinate departures, and they shared a look of exhausted triumph. We did it, Susan said simply. You did it, Ethan corrected. You and Michelle and Robert and Maria and David and Tom and everyone else who believed this could work. We did it together, Susan amended. But Ethan, you gave us permission to be excellent. That matters more than you know. By midnight, the ballroom was empty except for the cleanup crew. Ethan stood alone for a moment, looking at the space that had held so much potential for disaster and had instead become something remarkable. His phone buzzed, a text from Vivian. My office, Monday morning, 9 a.m. We have a lot to discuss about your permanent position. Permanent position. The words felt surreal. 3 weeks ago, he'd been mopping these floors. Now he was being courted by international CEOs and promised a permanent role in the company's leadership. Ethan left the Grand Meridian at 12:30 a.m., his body exhausted but his mind electric. The night air was cold and clean, and Chicago's skyline glittered around him like possibility made visible. When he got home, he checked on Maya, fast asleep with her stuffed butterfly clutched in her arms. He stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching her breathe, thinking about the future he was building for both of them. His phone buzzed again. This time, an email from Klaus Becker with the subject line, Partnership Proposal. Another from Li Wei. Follow-up discussion request. A third from Jiang Mei's assistant about scheduling a consultation call. The invisible man with a mop had become impossible to ignore. Ethan fell asleep that night with his laptop still open, emails still coming in, and for the first time in 3 years he dreamed about the future instead of just surviving the present. The summit had been his proof of concept. Monday morning would be about building something permanent, but even in his exhaustion, even in his triumph, Ethan knew the real work was just beginning. He hadn't just proven himself. He'd exposed a system, threatened an old guard, and demonstrated that talent didn't need permission from gatekeepers to rise. People like Gordon Hastings and Richard Pemberton were still out there, still embedded in the company structure, still invested in the old ways. Gerald was gone, but the culture that had enabled him remained. Changing a system was harder than winning a single battle. And Ethan had just declared war on a system that had been failing people like him for years. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Ethan dropped Maya at school, her excited chatter about the science fair washing over him like a familiar song, then rode the bus to the Grand Meridian with his stomach tight with anticipation. The summit's success had been documented in dozens of emails over the weekend, partnership agreements moving forward, contracts being drafted, international clients specifically requesting his involvement in future collaborations. But success, Ethan had learned, often created its own complications. Vivian's office door was open when he arrived at 9 a.m. She sat behind her desk with James Wright, the VP of Operations, and Helen Zhang from HR. The setup felt ominously formal. Sit, Vivian said, gesturing to the empty chair. We have a lot to cover. Ethan sat, his mind racing through possibilities. Had someone filed a complaint? Had the old guard found a way to undermine his success? Let me start with the good news, Vivian began. The summit generated 47 new partnership inquiries, 23 of which are already moving to contract negotiations. We're looking at potentially $200 million in new business over the next 2 years. The feedback scores were the highest we've ever received. 97% of attendees rated the event as excellent or outstanding. That's incredible, Ethan said, and meant it. It is. Which brings us to the complicated news. James leaned forward, his expression serious. Your success has created a problem. Several members of our management team are feeling threatened. Gordon Hastings filed a formal complaint claiming you exceeded your authority and created a hostile work environment. 2 other managers have lodged similar concerns. Ethan's jaw tightened. I did what was necessary to make the summit succeed. We know, Helen said, and their complaints are baseless. But they're also strategic. They're trying to build a case that you're disruptive, that bringing you into leadership creates more problems than it solves. So what happens now? Vivian pulled up something on her computer. Now we make a choice. We can offer you a permanent position as Director of International Relations, reporting directly to me. You'd oversee all translation services, cultural competency training, and international partnership coordination. It's a significant role with commensurate salary and benefits. It was everything Ethan had hoped for, but Vivian's expression suggested there was more coming. However, she continued, accepting this position means you'll be in direct conflict with several entrenched managers who see you as a threat to their authority. You'll face resistance, sabotage attempts, and constant political battles. It won't be easy. The alternative? Ethan asked. The alternative is we find you a consulting role, independent contractor, high hourly rate. You work with us on specific projects but aren't embedded in the company hierarchy. You'd avoid the political warfare, maintain flexibility for Maya's schedule, and honestly probably make more money. James added, the consulting route also gives you freedom to work with other companies. Jiang Mei wasn't the only executive interested in your services. You could build an entire practice around international hospitality consulting. Ethan sat back, processing. The consulting path was safer, more flexible, potentially more lucrative, but it was also a retreat. It meant the system that had kept him invisible would remain fundamentally unchanged. Other talented people would still get buried by managers like Gerald. Other single parents would still face discrimination disguised as reliability concerns. If I take the director position, Ethan said slowly, what kind of authority would I actually have? Vivian smiled slightly, as if she'd been waiting for this question. You'd have authority to restructure the entire international relations department, hire new people, remove obstacles, implement new policies. Essentially, you'd have the power to build the system you wish had existed when you applied for jobs 3 years ago. And the resistance? Will be significant, James said bluntly. But you'd have executive support. After Gerald's removal and the summit's success, the board is paying attention. They want to see systemic change. You'd be spearheading that change, which makes you valuable, but also a target. Helen pulled out a folder. I've been conducting the audit Vivian requested, reviewing all of Gerald's hiring decisions and management practices. What we found is worse than we initially thought. Over the past 8 years, we've lost or failed to hire approximately 40 highly qualified candidates due to discriminatory practices. Single parents, people with caregiving responsibilities, employees from non-traditional backgrounds, all systematically filtered out. How is that even legal? Ethan asked. It's not, which is why we're implementing immediate policy changes. But policies are only as good as the people enforcing them. We need someone in leadership who understands what it's like to be on the receiving end of these practices. Someone who won't let it happen again. The weight of what they were asking settled over Ethan. This wasn't just about a job or a title. This was about becoming the change he desperately needed 3 years ago. Can I ask a question? Ethan said. If I take this role and I fail, if the resistance is too much, if I can't deliver results, what happens to Maya? To my ability to provide for her? Vivian's expression softened. Fair question. Here's what I can promise. A 2-year guaranteed contract with severance protection. If we mutually agree the role isn't working, you leave with a year's salary and excellent references. Your daughter's security is protected regardless. And if I succeed? Then you transform this company's approach to talent management and international relations. You create opportunities for people who've been overlooked. You prove that competence and integrity matter more than connections. Vivian paused. And you make a very comfortable living doing work that actually matters. Ethan thought about Maya, about the promises he'd made to always be there for school pickup and bedtime stories. He thought about the 3 years of mopping floors while his master's degree gathered dust. He thought about Maria Chen and David Okonkwo and Tom Bradley and all the other talented people who'd been rendered invisible by a system designed to keep them out. "I'll take the director position," he said, "but I have conditions." James raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." "I want the authority to create a talent identification program, actively seeking out overlooked employees throughout the company who have skills we're not using. I want mandatory cultural competency training for all management, not just recommendations. And I want to establish a formal accommodation policy for single parents and caregivers with teeth, actual consequences for managers who discriminate." Vivian exchanged glances with James and Helen. Done, done, and done. "Anything else?" "Regular hours. I'm not working past 5 p.m. except in genuine emergencies. My daughter comes first." "Agreed. Though I suspect you'll find that working smarter matters more than working longer anyway." Vivian slid a contract across the desk. "Welcome to the executive team, Director Cole." Ethan read through the contract carefully. The salary made his eyes widen. The benefits were comprehensive. The severance protections were genuine. He signed it with hands that only trembled slightly. "When do I start?" he asked. "You already have," Vivian said. "Your first assignment is to attend the emergency board meeting this afternoon. Several board members want to understand what happened at the summit and what we're planning going forward. You're presenting." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Presenting what exactly?" "The truth. How a systemic failure in our talent management nearly cost us hundreds of millions in international business. How outdated attitudes about who deserves opportunity were actively harming our competitive position. And how fixing these problems isn't just the right thing to do. It's essential for our survival in a global marketplace." The board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the executive conference room on the top floor, a space Ethan had never even known existed. He spent the morning preparing with Vivian's guidance, assembling data, crafting arguments, anticipating objections. At 1:45 p.m., Ethan stood outside the conference room in his Navy suit, the same one that had seen him through his thesis defense, his first professional translation job, his daughter's mother's funeral, and now this. Susan appeared beside him with a folder. "Last-minute ammunition," she said, handing it to him. "Testimonials from summit attendees. I collected them over the weekend. Thought you might need evidence that people actually appreciated what we did." Ethan flipped through the pages, glowing reviews from Klaus Becker, from Li Wei, from Zhang Mei, from dozens of others. Concrete proof that respect and cultural competency weren't just nice ideals but actual business advantages. "Thank you," he said, meaning it deeply. "Go change the world," Susan replied. "Some of us are counting on you." The boardroom was intimidating, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago, a massive table that could seat 20, leather chairs that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. 12 board members were already seated, ranging from a woman in her 30s to a man who had to be in his 70s. Vivian sat at the head of the table, and she gestured Ethan to the seat beside her. "Everyone, this is Ethan Cole, our new Director of International Relations. He's going to walk us through what happened at the summit and what it revealed about our company's operational challenges." Ethan stood, connected his laptop to the presentation screen, and took a breath. 3 weeks ago, I was mopping the lobby floor downstairs, he began. "I have a master's degree in linguistics from the University of Amsterdam. I speak 6 languages fluently. I'd applied for 14 different positions over 3 years and been rejected for all of them, despite being qualified for each one. The official reason was always that I didn't meet minimum requirements. The real reason was that I'm a single father, and certain managers decided that made me unreliable." The room was completely silent. On the night Ms. Hart overheard me speaking Dutch during an emergency call, she discovered that our talent management system wasn't just inefficient, it was actively discriminatory. We'd been systematically excluding qualified candidates who didn't fit certain profiles, while promoting less qualified people based on personal connections. This wasn't just wrong ethically, it was costing us money and competitive advantage. Ethan pulled up the first slide, the comparison between Brandon's original summit plan and the restructured version. The Global Hospitality Summit was a perfect example. The previous coordinator, hired because of family connections rather than qualifications, had created a plan that would have been a diplomatic disaster. Japanese and Korean delegations seated together despite corporate conflicts. Muslim attendees scheduled through prayer times. No proper translation services despite 40 countries attending. It was frankly a mess. A board member, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Alvarez, spoke up. But the summit was successful. Extraordinarily so, according to the reports. It was. Because we completely rebuilt it. Because we invested in actual cultural competency instead of surface-level aesthetics. Because we treated 1,500 international guests as human beings with specific needs rather than generic attendees to impress. Ethan advanced the slides, showing the feedback scores, the new partnership inquiries, the projected revenue impact. The results speak for themselves. When we actually use our talent effectively and respect our international partners authentically, we succeed. An older board member, Robert Chen, according to his nameplate, leaned forward. This all sounds very progressive, Mr. Cole, but what's the practical application? How do we prevent this kind of mismanagement systematically? 3 concrete steps, Ethan said. First, we implement blind resume screening for all positions below executive level. No names, no demographic information, just qualifications and experience. This eliminates unconscious bias and forces us to evaluate people on merit. Second, we create a formal audit system for hiring decisions. Any position that receives qualified internal applicants who are rejected must have documented justification that's reviewed by an independent committee. No more managers blocking people arbitrarily. Third, we establish mandatory accommodation policies for caregivers, flexible scheduling, predictable hours, support for single parents. This isn't charity. This is recognizing that people with caregiving responsibilities often develop exactly the kind of organizational skills and cultural sensitivity we need in leadership. Patricia was nodding. What about the financial impact of these changes? The initial investment is approximately $200,000 for new screening systems, training, and policy development. The projected return, based on reduced turnover, better talent utilization, and improved international business development, is conservatively estimated at $5 million annually. Ethan pulled up Helen's audit data. We've been spending approximately $500,000 per year on settlements, recruitment to replace lost talent, and outsourced services that we could have handled internally if we'd been using our people effectively. These changes pay for themselves within 3 months. The questions continued for another hour, some skeptical, some supportive, all probing. Ethan answered each one with data, with examples from the summit, with the hard evidence of what happened when talent was recognized rather than buried. Finally, the board chair, an elegant woman in her 60s named Margaret Foster, called for a vote. All in favor of implementing Director Cole's proposed reforms as outlined with a 1-year pilot program and quarterly reviews? 11 hands went up, 1 abstention. Motion carries, Margaret said. Mr. Cole, you have your mandate. Don't waste it. After the board members filed out, Vivian pulled Ethan aside. That was masterful, she said. You gave them exactly what they needed, the moral argument backed by irrefutable business logic. Well done. Now comes the hard part, Ethan replied. Actually implementing everything I just promised. You're not doing it alone. You have executive support, board approval, and a budget. Start hiring your team. Over the next 6 weeks, Ethan built his department from the ground up. He promoted Maria Chen to Senior Cultural Liaison for Asian Markets. David Okonkwo became Director of African Business Development. Susan transferred from event planning to become his Deputy Director of Operations. He hired 3 new translators, 2 cultural competency trainers, and a data analyst to track inclusion metrics. But the real transformation came from the talent identification program. Ethan personally reviewed the files of every employee who'd applied for promotions in the past 5 years and been rejected. He found a security guard with a degree in international law, a housekeeper who'd been a certified translator in her home country, a parking attendant who spoke 4 languages and had coordinated UN peacekeeping logistics. Each discovery was another indictment of the old system and another opportunity to build something better. The resistance Vivian had warned about materialized quickly. Gordon Hastings filed 3 more complaints before finally accepting a buyout package and leaving the company. 2 other managers who'd been part of Gerald's network resigned rather than comply with the new hiring protocols. Richard Pemberton, chastened by his own role in the dysfunction, became an unexpected ally, using his legal expertise to strengthen the accommodation policies. 3 months after the summit, Ethan presented his first quarterly report to the board. The international business pipeline had grown by 40%. Employee satisfaction scores in previously overlooked demographics had jumped significantly. Turnover among talented employees had dropped by half, and the company had identified and promoted 17 high-potential employees who'd been languishing in roles far below their capabilities. These aren't just numbers, Ethan told the board. Each one represents a person who was invisible before, someone whose talent was being wasted, someone who now has an opportunity to contribute and advance based on what they can do, not who they know. Margaret Foster smiled. Keep going, Mr. Cole. You're proving that doing the right thing and doing good business aren't mutually exclusive. But the moment that mattered most to Ethan came on a Thursday evening, 6 months after he'd answered that phone call in Dutch. He was leaving the office at exactly 5 p.m., as had become his invariable practice, when he saw a young woman in a housekeeper's uniform standing near the lobby entrance, looking uncertain. "Can I help you?" Ethan asked. The woman hesitated, then spoke in accented English. "I heard. People say you help. People like me. I have a degree in engineering from Syria, but here, I clean rooms. I apply for jobs. They say no. I think maybe. You understand?" Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Recognition, kinship, the memory of his own invisibility. He pulled out a business card and handed it to her. "What's your name?" "Amira. Amira Hassan." "Amira, I want you to email me your resume and a cover letter explaining what kind of role you're looking for. Don't worry about perfect English. Just tell me your story and what you're qualified to do. Can you do that?" Amira's eyes filled with tears. Yes, I can do that, thank you. Thank you so much." As she walked away, clutching the business card like a lifeline, Ethan thought about the dozens of similar conversations he'd had over the past months. Each one was a reminder of why this work mattered, why changing the system was worth every political battle and every late-night policy revision. That evening, after picking up Maya from her science fair, where her butterfly migration project had won first place, they walked home through the Chicago twilight. Maya chattered about lepidopterists and metamorphosis and how butterflies knew where to go even though they'd never been there before. "It's like they have a map inside them," she said wonderingly. "Like they just know they're supposed to be somewhere else, and they keep going until they get there." Ethan thought about his own migration, from invisible janitor to executive director, from survival mode to actually building something meaningful. He thought about all the other people still in chrysalis, waiting for the system to crack open enough to let them transform. "Yeah," he said, squeezing Maya's hand, "I think I know exactly what you mean." A year after the summit, Ethan stood in the Grand Meridian's lobby, not to mop the floors, but to greet the delegates arriving for the second annual Global Hospitality Summit. The event had grown to 2,000 attendees from 55 countries. The planning had been complex but smooth, handled by a team that now included 12 full-time staff members, half of whom had been promoted from unexpected places within the company. Klaus Becker arrived early, as was his custom, and greeted Ethan with a warm handshake that had become genuine friendship over the year of partnership development. "Ethan, my friend, I brought someone to meet you," Klaus said, gesturing to a young man beside him. "This is my nephew, Thomas. He just completed his master's in international business, and he's looking for opportunities. I told him if he wants to learn from the best, he should talk to you." Ethan smiled, remembering when he'd been the young graduate full of hope and potential before the system had nearly crushed it out of him. "I'd be happy to talk with him. Send me his resume." As Klaus and Thomas moved toward registration, Vivian appeared at Ethan's shoulder. "You know Zhang Mei is offering you another consulting contract?" she said. "I know. I'm going to accept it. The hours work with my schedule, and Maya likes that I'm home for dinner every night." "You've built something remarkable here," Vivian said, looking around the lobby where 2,000 people from 55 countries were being welcomed in their own languages, respected in their own cultures, treated as the valuable human beings they were. "This is what it looks like when talent gets recognized instead of buried." "This is what it looks like when the system changes," Ethan corrected. "One person getting an opportunity is luck. 2,000 people being welcomed properly is infrastructure." That night, after the opening gala concluded to standing ovations and record-breaking partnership agreements, Ethan walked out of the Grand Meridian at midnight. The Chicago skyline sparkled around him, full of lights and possibility, and he thought about the journey from invisible to indispensable, from survival to purpose. His phone buzzed with a text from Amira Hassan, the Syrian engineer he'd met in the lobby 6 months ago. She'd just been promoted to junior project manager in the facility's design department. The message was simple. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. I'm paying it forward. Ethan smiled and pocketed his phone. That was the real victory, not his own success, but the system change that meant others wouldn't have to fight as hard as he had. Every Amira who got promoted, every Maria who got recognized, every overlooked parent who finally received flexible scheduling was proof that transformation was possible. When he got home, Maya was already asleep, but she'd left a note on the kitchen table in her careful 7-year-old handwriting. Daddy, I'm proud of you. Love, Maya. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd once compiled job applications that would be rejected, where he'd calculated how many more night shifts he could physically handle, where he'd wondered if his daughter would grow up watching him be invisible forever. Now that table held partnership contracts worth millions, consulting offers from international firms, and a handwritten note from his daughter who no longer had to wonder if they'd make rent or if Daddy would be home for bedtime. The butterfly had completed its migration, the chrysalis had cracked open, and the invisible man who once cleaned floors was finally, irrevocably, seen. But more importantly, he'd held the door open behind him. He'd changed the system so the next person wouldn't need a chance encounter or a lucky phone call to be recognized. He'd built infrastructure where there had been only gatekeeping, created opportunity where there had been only exclusion. In the morning, Ethan would wake up and do it all again. Identify overlooked talent, fight entrenched resistance, prove that competence and integrity mattered more than connections. It was exhausting work, political and complicated and never fully finished. But as he turned off the kitchen light and checked on Maya one last time, watching her sleep peacefully with her butterfly project on the nightstand and her future bright with possibility, Ethan knew with absolute certainty that some battles were worth fighting. Not for victory, but for transformation, not for himself, but for everyone still waiting to be seen. The invisible had become visible, and in doing so, had illuminated the path for everyone else still hidden in the shadows, still waiting for their moment, still believing that talent and dedication might someday be enough. It would be enough. Ethan had proven it, and he would spend the rest of his career making sure that proof became policy. That exception became expectation, that one moment of visibility became a system designed to see everyone. The story didn't end with his promotion. It began there. Because real change wasn't about one person rising, it was about rebuilding the ladder so everyone could climb. And Ethan Cole, former janitor and current director, was just getting started.